Hello. Thank you for joining the Community Orchard Network for our second meeting on urban orchards. My name is Beth Cardin, Executive Director at the Baltimore Orchard Project, and I will be today's moderator. We're here today to talk about community orchards and food forest programs and to provide an open dialogue on everything that encompasses. So whether you're a seasoned practitioner or want to find out if you should explore fruit and nut trees, we hope you find this as a valuable resource for new ideas. You should know that we launched this community just 2 months ago, the beginning of January, and there are already 140 of us who are part of it. This open forum will be run through a Google group, which you'll all be added to as a part of this webcast if you're not already a part of it. And this is also where you can post questions and resources and find out about future meetings. If you know of anyone else who might want to join the group, they can contact us excuse me, at orchard, O-R-C-H-A-R-D, at acttrees, that's A-C-trees, A-C-T-R-E-E-S.org. And I want to thank AC Trees, the Alliance for Community Trees, as well, for being our administrators and sponsors, and thanks in particular to Anthony Lee and Sarah Anderson, who helped put this webcast together. Today's meeting will be structured as follows. First, a look into who's participating today, and then a quick poll question. And Sarah, my computer's not advancing, so if you can go to the next slide. Next one. All right, so here's a quick look at who is part of our group today. We have many of our folks who are associated with nonprofits, but others who are with municipalities, schools, who are independent professionals and volunteers. You can see from all the various North American locations. We're thrilled that in a mere 8 weeks or so, we've been able to attract so many people, and we're hoping to attract many more as time goes on. And we like with every webinar just to have a little bit of a poll to have a sense of who we are. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that from Kyle Clark, one of our presenters, in a minute. But we want to ask you about motivations. What inspired you most to do the work that you're doing? So the poll question will be, what aspect of community orchards inspires you? We should probably add the word most, since you might be inspired by several of these opportunities. So Sarah, can we open up the poll? So choose which one inspires you the most, and we'll keep the poll open for about 10 seconds. Okay, Sarah, how are we doing with that? All right. All right, so it's pretty evenly split between those, the four on the edges, with land use sort of being the, the least interesting. All right, wonderful. Well, we'll add that to the polls that we've done in the past and polls we'll do in the future, so it'll give us a good sense of who we are as we grow. So our first speaker today is Kyle Clark, who's Director of Sustainability at EnSave, Inc., and he will discuss the community orchard and urban food forest movement, and we'll have a few minutes at the end for questions. Just as a bit of background, I first bumped into Kyle when I saw his website, urbanfoodforestry.org, which is a fabulous website that I know he's somewhat frustrated about that his new job doesn't allow him to keep updated as much as possible, but it's a great website with a lot of good research. And Kyle is one of the pioneers who is doing studies about what this urban orchard, urban food forestry movement is all about. So we're thrilled to have him here with us to help us understand who we are as we begin our journey together. And then Katy, Kolker, who's the Executive Director of the Portland Fruit Tree Project, one of the pioneering fruit tree projects of the country, will discuss 4 orchard projects in Portland, Oregon. Just so you should know, this webcast is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be posted in the Google group later this week. We also want to encourage your participation, so please use the question box to the right to ask our speakers questions, in the chat box on the bottom throughout the webcast to make comments. So as a way to introduce Kyle, In 2009, Kyle moved to Sweden to pursue a master's degree in sustainability science at Lund University. His master research focused on urban food forestry and community orchards, which was inspired by the abundance of fruit and nut trees in Scandinavian urban landscapes. This research culminated in the first peer-reviewed journal article on this subject in 2013. He really is a pioneer in this. Kyle now lives in Vermont, where he has started his own food forest. And when he's not in the garden, Kyle works as the Director of Sustainability for EnSave, Inc., an agricultural consulting company based in Richmond, Vermont, and he also consults part-time with municipal governments on urban food forestry. Welcome, Kyle. You are on the air.
Thanks, Nina, and thanks to everyone for joining the webinar. I'm very thankful to be here. So as you can see, the title of my presentation is Urban Food Forestry, a Multifunctional Approach to Increase Food Security and Provide Ecosystem Services. And as Nina mentioned, this was the subject of my master's thesis that I completed in Sweden in 2011. And again, it was really inspired by the urban landscapes over there and the amount of fruit and nut trees that were readily available in contrast to a lot of cities here in the US. So, I should start by saying this is a very broad subject with many possible implications for society. And my goal in the next 20 minutes or so is really to give kind of a 40,000-foot view of this growing trend and share some of the insights that I learned through my research. So before I jump into urban food forestry, I just want to say a few words about kind of the big picture and frame it up. As most of you know, the world is urbanizing rapidly. We have more than 50% of the world's population in cities at present. That's expected to jump to around 60% by 2030 and just keep climbing from there. So this raises, a number of concerns about food security. Cities are inherently dependent upon rural areas and kind of the hinterland to supply them with food, which opens up a variety of vulnerabilities. At the same time, we have climate change, which is exacerbating food security in many parts of the world. We also have what's known as the dual burden of malnutrition, where there are non-communicable diseases associated with overnutrition and obesity rising rapidly in cities throughout the world. And really what's kind of overarching this is that governments and urban planners are seeking ways to mitigate these problems. And one of the possible solutions that's been put forth by a variety of entities is increasing accessibility and consumption of nutrient-dense foods such as fruits and nuts and vegetables. So one way to kind of visualize the vulnerability of our food systems is to look at where we live versus where we produce our food. So in this map you can see kind of the urban centers within the United States. This is where we live. And contrast this with where we produce our fruit. You can see the majority of it is produced out in California in the Central Valley, as well as down in Florida. About 50% or more of our fruit comes from the Central Valley, which is currently undergoing an unprecedented drought. So this really illustrates the distance that we have to transport our fruit to get to our cities, and this is subject to a variety of potential shocks to the energy system or the transport system or what have you. So these were things that I was contemplating back in 2009, 2010 when I started my master thesis, and I was looking around the city where I was living in southern Sweden and really seeing a lot of fruit trees and picking a lot of fruits and really enjoying that kind of contribution to my quality of life. And it got me thinking, why isn't this more prevalent? Why is this not integrated more into urban planning in the U.S.? And are there initiatives out there that are really bridging urban forestry and food security? So these are kind of the three primary research questions that I identified and pursued over that year and a half. The first, as I mentioned, is are there existing initiatives? The second is what is the actual potential capacity for urban food trees to contribute to food security? Really taking a quantitative perspective on it. And then thirdly, from a planning perspective, what species are suitable for food production within cities within the context of a changing climate. So I'm just going to kind of go through these one by one and primarily focus on the first two. So, when I got started on my thesis, I obviously, started on the internet and started searching around to see what type of initiatives were out there. And I was pretty surprised to find quite a lot, right off the bat. I found 37 initiatives without too much trouble. Some of these you'll recognize, Baltimore Orchard Project, which Nina is involved with. And what I started to do was dig through their websites and read about their mission statements, who was involved, what their goals and aspirations were, and really try to put it within more of a academic or theoretical context to try and understand this movement and put some sort of sideboards to it to help people understand what was going on. So what I found was, or the way that I kind of tried to simplify it was breaking it down into core activities. And what I found was that there were three primary core activities that these initiatives were involved with. Planting, being the most obvious. There's many of these initiatives that are involved in planting fruit and nut trees, on public property, public open space within cities, partnering with, municipalities, churches, parks, hospitals, and so forth. The second type of initiative or activity that I identified was mapping, where there's a variety of organizations who are either making handmade maps in some cases, all the way up to developing fully functional apps like Neighborhood Fruit, which you can see a screenshot of here, that depend on voluntary input to map fruit trees around cities. And the third type is harvesting, which are typically volunteer-oriented initiatives which seek to identify and then harvest fruit from trees on both public and private land in cities. And typically this fruit is split between the harvesters, food banks, and other initiatives, and sometimes a portion is given back to the tree owner. So what I found was that about 3/4 of the initiatives focused just on one of these activities as their primary activity. The most popular activity was harvesting. About 35% of those 37 initiatives were involved in harvesting, around 27% involved in planting, and around 11% were involved in primarily in mapping, and only 8% were doing all three of these. And again, this research is back from 2012, 2013. It was updated for the journal article, so this is probably changing, but this was a snapshot from that point in time. And just to give you kind of a taste or flavor for these three types of initiatives, this initiative here, not far from the tree, is a harvesting initiative based out of Toronto. And basically the way it works is that they have a web interface or website where people that are in the city can register trees that they might have in their backyard or that they know about where the fruit isn't being utilized, or they can't utilize all of the fruit themselves. What they do is that they then schedule volunteers to go out and pick the fruit when it's ready, and then the fruit is split three ways. Some of it's offered back to the tree owner, a portion of it is taken by the volunteers, and a portion of it is donated to the food insecure population through food banks and the like. And in the first 3 years of this organization, it grew fairly rapidly. In the first year, I believe they harvested around 3,000 pounds of fruit from 40 trees, and then in the third year, they were up to almost 20,000 pounds. And they were picking from 228 trees with 700 volunteers and 8 staff. Philadelphia Orchard Project is a great example of a planting oriented initiative. They've been planting orchards all around Philly since 2007. I believe they're up to 37 orchards at present. They've planted over 900 trees, over 1,400 shrubs and vines, and almost 10,000 perennials. And these are, partnerships with a variety of entities around the city, parks and churches and schools and so forth. And they really highlight the, the diversity of people that are wanting to become engaged in these initiatives, and the capacity to build social capital within the city, as well as contribute to public education and food security. And I know someone from Philadelphia Orchard Project presented on the last webinar, which is recorded, and that's definitely worth checking out. The third type is mapping initiatives, and as I mentioned, there's a handful that are kind of doing hand-drawn maps. This is one from an organization called Fallen Fruit, who kind of takes the spin of they look at urban food production and fruit trees through the lens of art, and they've developed these maps in a variety of cities around the world, and they've been shown in various galleries and so forth to kind of raise awareness and get people thinking about how public space should be utilized and leveraged within urban environments. And then on the right, you can see a screenshot of one of these apps, Neighborhood Fruits. I believe they have somewhere between 10 and 15,000 fruit trees mapped throughout the United States. So as part of my research into existing initiatives, I wanted to look at not only grassroots initiatives, but also whether there was any policy or planning that was taking place more as a top-down approach. And so the way that I went about this was really looking at urban forestry master plans. I found 30 urban forestry master plans as part of my research, and decided to do a basic text analysis to look through all of these plans and look for instances of words like food and fruit and wildlife, and just try to identify whether they were thinking about human food security. And basically what I found was about 77% of them, or 23 of these plans, mentioned wildlife, habitat, and food security, whereas only about 4%, or 4 of them, or 13%, mentioned human food security. So obviously, a lot more planning and thinking going on with regards to wildlife versus human food security. And in total, these plans comprised about 2,000 pages. So there was a substantial amount of text and planning that was in these documents. So those 4 plans, I believe 3 of them were from British Columbia and 1 was from California. So there definitely seems to be a boom in the Northwest and in British Columbia in particular. And these are just a couple quotes from 2 of those plans. From Victoria, they said, when replacing existing trees, we need to take food security issues into consideration by planting diverse varieties of native and non-native food-producing trees. And from Seychelles, the district can protect the biodiversity of wild foods by educating about sustainable harvesting, diversifying park planting regimens to include fruit and nut trees, addressing regulatory barriers to food production, and promoting shade-grown foods to preserve tree cover. So it's evident that they had devoted quite a bit of time and effort to integrating food trees into their urban forestry planning initiatives, and a lot of this was input and pressure from the public in those cities to include this in their planning. So at the kind of the end of my initial stage of the research, I was surprised to find all these initiatives, and then faced with the challenge of kind of putting a umbrella over it and trying to kind of integrate it into one cohesive movement for the purpose of my thesis. And what I found was that these initiatives were really pulling in insights and research and practice from primarily 3 established areas, one being urban forestry, the other being urban agriculture, and the third being agroforestry and forest gardening, which includes permaculture. And all 3 of these were kind of culminating or being used in various ways and integrated into these movements. And for lack of a better term, I decided upon urban food forestry to kind of describe this conglomeration of movements. So the definition that I had come up with was that urban food forestry is the intentional and strategic use of woody perennial food-producing species in urban edible landscapes to improve the sustainability and resilience of urban communities. It's not a perfect definition by any means, but it's kind of the best I could come up with to encapsulate the breadth of these initiatives. So the second piece that I was looking at in my research was what is the potential capacity for urban food forestry to contribute to food security. And really what I did was I chose Burlington, Vermont, which is my hometown, as a case study, and decided to do a GIS analysis in order to establish a baseline to measure capacity. I used two metrics. One was the daily recommended intake of fruit from the World Health Organization, which is a minimum of 200 grams per day. And the second was looking at USDA census data that looks at food insecure populations, and they have a metric they use called very food insecure population. So I quantified those and came up with baseline numbers from which to measure, and then really did a GIS analysis of the city, which you can kind of see on the left there, to identify open space within the city that could potentially be planted with fruit trees. And this land constitutes approximately 4.5% of the city. And I should highlight that this is really hypothetical. The types of plantings that I was examining would require significant effort to undertake, particularly at the upper end. But nevertheless, it was my attempt at a quantitative analysis of food production capacity. So what I did was basically looked at 9 different scenarios. Planting on 5% of this open space, 25%, and 50%, and then looked at used agronomic data from commercial apple orchards and looked at planting or a yield of 25, 50, or 75% of a commercial standard yield for orchards. And this is a bit of a messy chart, and I won't go into the details, but essentially what you're seeing here is the results of these 9 different planting scenarios on the public space in Burlington. And there's 2 lines on the graph, horizontal lines. The first is the threshold of the very food insecure population's caloric deficit, and the second above is the threshold of reaching the minimum fruit intake requirement as specified by World Health Organization. So as you can see in at least 3 of these scenarios, you would be able to reach the entire caloric deficit of the food insecure population of Burlington. And at the most ambitious of the scenarios, you could potentially supply the entire minimum recommended fruit intake for the entire city of Burlington, which is a city of approximately 60 to 70,000 people. So, the third part that I wanted to dig into was really looking at some practical aspects of implementation and trying to establish some useful tool for municipalities to consider who are wanting to pursue plantings of food trees in urban landscapes. And one paper I found in my research was called the Climate Species Matrix. It was developed by a team out in Germany, and they were really looking at creating a decision support tool for municipalities to select trees in cities to avoid tree loss due to climate change, specifically drought and cold. Extreme cold conditions. So what I did in my research was expanded this to include food as an aspect, and developed a climate food species matrix. And the food component, we looked at 5 different aspects of the fruit that was produced by the tree. Is it consumable? Is it commercially produced? How familiar is it? Is it palatable raw? Can it be eaten right off the tree? Does it need to be prepared in any way? And essentially, we looked at about 500 or so trees. We started out with the trees in that initial study, and then brought in trees from a variety of different databases. And the net result was that we identified about 70 trees that would be recommended for urban landscapes based on their resilience to cold and drought and their edibility, and 30 of these species we said were highly recommended. And again, this is really just a starting point. I think that this was just a place to experiment with these species and kind of refine the matrix from there. But the idea is that this would support practitioners who are trying to implement urban orchard or urban food forest. So, just some things to consider. There's obviously a lot of potential issues that can come about with planting fruit trees or food trees in urban environments, and a lot of debate that takes place over these plantings. In my experience, the first thing that comes up with municipalities and others is really the issue of maintenance. How can we minimize the amount of maintenance while maximizing the production of these trees? Second is pest and disease, which is related to maintenance as well. And really, these first two can be addressed in large part by the design and the selection of proper cultivars, ones that have disease resistance and are generally low maintenance, not planting supermarket varieties that are going to require all kinds of spraying and so forth. Another issue is, falling and rotting fruit. You obviously want to make sure, especially with large plantings, that there's going to be some mechanism in place to utilize that fruit. And different cities have come up with different ways to address this issue. I know Seattle has urban orchard stewards that are trained by the municipality and are assigned trees to essentially be the steward of, and they can play a role in ensuring that the fruit is utilized, as well as partnering with local harvesting initiatives that are going to have the capacity to utilize volunteer labor and distribute fruit to food banks and so forth. The issue of invasive species, this is a large topic and is debated quite a lot, especially within permaculture communities. Something to be aware of. There is I would say a gradient of invasiveness, but it's something that should be considered. You certainly wouldn't want to plant highly invasive species at the edge of a city. So just another thing to consider. Distribution and access, there's issues that can arise over unequal harvesting of the fruit, or just simply physical access to the fruit. So a lot of this comes down to organic governance that will develop. I mean, obviously the fruit is everyone's if it's planted in a public space, but you wouldn't want someone coming in and just stripping all of the trees for either personal benefit or personal use. And that's an issue that I think just will vary from place to place and so forth. So in conclusion, really, some of the main take-homes from my research were that these initiatives are rapidly rising. Most of them started 2007 or sooner, and they're growing in their ambition and scale. Urban planners are increasingly integrating urban food trees into urban forestry master plans and other urban planning documents. There's an obvious potential for urban food trees to mitigate urban food insecurity and contribute to other aspects of quality of life within cities, especially social capital building. And really, it's critical to learn from these existing initiatives and share knowledge and experience, which really highlights the importance of workshops and webinars like the one you're all participating in now. So that's about all I have. And here's my contact information if anyone wants to get a hold of me and dig into more detail in any regard. Please feel free to contact me at any time. There is a public access paper that kind of goes into more detail, and you can find that by kind of Googling this title down below here.
Thank you so very much. This is wonderful introduction to who we are and how we all fit into this movement that I'm not sure all of us understood that we were participating in when we in fact did our individual initiatives. And I just, again, Kyle's wonderful website, which, as I say, he doesn't populate as often as he would like to, but still has wonderful resources, is urbanfoodforestry.org, so take a look at that. We have about 2 minutes for questions here before we move on to Katy. So Sarah, has there no questions yet? Okay, so I have just I have actually two questions, and Kyle, you can answer one or the other as you see fit. One, what is the political climate for, in fact, allowing and encouraging this kind of land use for urban orcharding and urban food forestry in North America? If you can, I don't know if the United States is different from Canada. So what's the political climate? Can we do it? And two, very quickly, are you imagining these will be commercially managed orchards and food forests, or that we can actually make a significant contribution to the food system by nonprofit and volunteer organizations?
So I'll briefly address both of them. With regards to the political climate, I think it really varies from city to city. I mean, certainly some cities like the urban plans that integrate food trees are obviously very favorable political climates to implement this type of initiative in, whereas other cities just haven't even thought about it and can be quite averse to the idea of having fruit falling. Certainly, I've consulted with quite a number of municipalities, and it seems to be that the political environment is becoming more open to this type of initiative. In terms of whether there would be commercial involvement in these initiatives, I think that really if this is going to make a dent in urban food insecurity in any significant way, there's going to need to be more involvement from private actors and potentially some involvement of commercial enterprise, simply because there's going to reach a point at which volunteer labor will be stretched too thin. So I think having some type of hybrid initiatives is probably going to be the next evolution of this, but time will tell.
Thank you again. Would you be available if we wanted to reach out to you for some more technical questions in the future? Would we be able to continue to touch base with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that would be fabulous. Thank you so much. This has been just wonderful. So we want to move on now to one of the pioneers of the urban orcharding and harvesting initiatives, and that's Katy Kolker, who is the founder and executive director of the Portland Fruit Tree Project. She's a native of Baltimore. Yay, Baltimore. We export some of our best. I hope to think that we keep some of our best as well. She's been living in Portland, Oregon, and working in the fields of sustainable agriculture and social justice for 12 years. She previously worked for Portland's city-run Community Gardens program, a food justice nonprofit called Growing Gardens, and agricultural extension at Washington State University. She's also served on the Portland Food Policy Council, where she spearheaded a successful zoning code revision to legalize urban agriculture in this city. By the way, Katy, is that online, the Food Policy Council's recommendations? Can we find that online?
It is, yeah. It's a very complicated link because it's on the city's website, but you can Google it, Urban Food Code Portland. You could probably find it there, or anyone could send me an email and ask for the link, and I'd be happy to share it.
Super, that would be helpful for many of us. So Katy lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband, her 1-year-old daughter, and 8 chickens. So Katy, you're on the air.
Thanks, Nina, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. I'm just thrilled to be a part of this exciting new network and look forward to all of the learning that we'll do together, learning from each other and building this movement for community orchards. So I'm going to give just a general overview of what our organization does. We do a number of things, including community orchards, and an overview of our current projects and some of the successes and challenges that we've had, in hopes of just providing an example that others can be inspired by, can learn from, and might even have suggestions for how we can do better. So, Nina, I'm not actually seeing my toggle here to go to the next slide. So if someone could proceed to the next slide for me, that would be great. Oh, now I see it. Great, thank you. So about Portland Fruit Tree Project, our organization started about 8 years ago when we noticed fruit going to waste from trees all around the city. Our area is actually a really great fruit producing area, and there are already fruit trees all around the neighborhoods throughout the city of Portland, but the vast majority of the fruit was going to waste. And we know that many folks in our community are experiencing food insecurity or hunger. Over 14% of people in Oregon experience food insecurity or hunger every year, And so many more have limited access to fresh produce, which can be difficult to afford on a limited budget. So we just saw a really clear connection that could be made between this valuable resource that was going to waste and folks who could use it. So we started in 2006 organizing people to harvest fruit trees that already existed in the city, with sort of two main goals, which are the heart of our mission, which are increasing equitable access to healthful food and strengthening communities. And so we do that by empowering neighbors to share in the harvest and cultivation of city-grown produce, and of course our focus is on fruit trees. And let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry, still not seeing the advance button. There it is. Okay. So we have 4 programs, and they're all interrelated. So in order to sort of effectively paint the picture of our Community Orchards program, I think it's important to also share what we do with our other programs. So we have our harvesting programs, our fruit tree stewardship programs, our fruit preservation programs, and community orchards. So our harvesting program is essentially our flagship program, and it's what we began with when our organization started over 8 years ago. So what we do is we bring people together in community harvesting events to gather fruit that might otherwise go to waste and distribute it to folks who need it. And we have a couple different ways that we do this. We organize group harvests, which are harvesting events in partnership with other organizations that specifically serve low-income folks. And we organize harvests just for their clients, and they get to take home or back to their agency up to 100% of the fruit that they pick. And then our harvesting parties are open to anyone, and half of the fruit goes to local food pantries, the rest to harvest participants. And we reserve half of the harvest participant slots for people living on low incomes. So really our focus in our harvesting program and in all of our program is to primarily engage folks who might otherwise have limited access to fresh produce. We've been doing this program for a number of years, and it's grown. For the first few years it grew. It nearly doubled every year. We started with doing 8 harvesting events, then we did 16, then we did 32, then we did 49, and year after year. And now we're sort of in a slower but steady growth curve. And this past year in 2014, we organized 102 community harvesting events. About 15% of them were group harvests, the rest were harvesting parties. We harvested over 50,000 pounds of fruit from 143 sites and more than 300 trees. About 1,200 folks participated in our harvesting events, more than half of whom were from low-income households. And fruit was distributed to more than 7,600 individuals and families. Our tree registry currently includes thousands of trees whose owners want to share the bounty, and we only harvest trees that are registered by their owners. The vast majority of trees that we harvest are on private property and mostly residential property. Before we started our community orchards program, there were actually a few community orchards already in existence that we harvested, but they were not very well maintained. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that and those partnerships in a bit. But that's sort of an overview of our harvest program. We also have our fruit tree stewardship programs, which were started in 2010. So we for a few years only did the harvesting program, but we always had a broader vision for really a whole systems approach in which we were not only gathering the fruit but also stewarding the resource of these really valuable trees. We noticed that the vast majority of fruit trees that weren't being harvested by their owners were also not being cared for by their owners. And we all know that regular tree care is necessary in order for the trees to produce good quality, healthy, and abundant fruit. So we started the fruit tree stewardship program with 2 primary goals. One was to empower people to care for their own trees, provide education and tools for them to do so, and that had been identified as a significant barrier, was folks not knowing how to care for their own trees. And then also to provide some tree care services for tree owners who were not able to care for their trees. So we developed 2 programs. Our tree care workshop series is a series of workshops on tree care topics throughout the year, and then our tree care teams program is essentially a service learning program in which people dedicate a full year of service, 10 sessions over the course of the year. They get a lot of hands-on training and then care for a dedicated group of trees as a team. and we have 6 tree care teams, 4 regular and 2 advanced. In 2014, we provided hands-on education and skills trainings to 263 people, about 50 of whom got a year of dedicated training through our tree care teams program, and we cared for 271 trees at 26 sites. We also have a food preservation program that was created out of recognizing that a lot of people who have access to these huge bounties of fresh fruit that they can either get in their own backyard fruit trees or through harvesting with us or through coming out to a community orchard, they might not know how to use it, whether it's a fruit that's unfamiliar to them or they're just getting large quantities that they can't possibly use all of it fresh before it starts to rot. So we offer food preservation workshops on a number of different methods and topics, and then we are developing fruit info cards to be distributed at all harvesting events and food pantries that are multilingual and provide just really basic explanation of how to use and preserve the fresh fruits. And finally, this brings us to our community orchards program. So I mentioned that the vast majority of trees that we were working with were on private property, and while most of the tree owners were really generous in opening up their space for groups to come out and harvest and to host workshops and tree care teams, we just saw huge and unique lasting benefits that could be accomplished through dedicated public fruit orchards in our city. And we've discussed these, and Kyle talked about many of these, but long-term food access, public demonstration and education in perennial food cultivation, community building at the neighborhood level, and fostering a sense of place and sense of ecological stewardship were identified as the biggest benefits that our community could see through having dedicated fruit orchards. So what we do is we organize people to develop community orchards. This is done primarily in partnership with other organizations that are deeply rooted in the surrounding communities. We basically have a model that's based on volunteer leadership and leadership from partner organizations. So we have volunteer leadership programs in which we help folks develop their leadership skills and their knowledge in order to take on coordination and maintenance at each orchard over time. And we organize community events to provide education, to perform orchard care, and to bring people together. So we have a number of 4 community orchards that I'm going to talk about today. When we first started in 2010, we started with 2 pilot orchards, the Sabin Community Orchard and the Green Thumb Community Orchard. So the Sabin Community Orchard, and they're very different. The reason we started with 2 pilot orchards was because we recognized 2 sort of main types of orchard that we could take on. One being helping the organizations that have existing orchards on their land to make them more healthy and more productive for the community, and then 2, to develop new orchards. So the Sabin Community Orchard is an orchard that we started from scratch. The property is owned by our local Bureau of Transportation. It's actually a slope that would have been made into a road if it hadn't been so sloped. And so it's a public right-of-way. It was covered in grass. We partnered with the local community association to develop it into a small community orchard. It was established in 2010. We did a community design process in which the community decided that they wanted to have a food forest design. So in addition to the fruit trees, we also incorporate a number of understory plants, including natives, insectary plants, and edible plants. We did a couple phases of planting. The first phase was about 14 trees, and then we've planted more since then. We have 30 fruit-bearing trees, and we've established some interpretive signage for self-guided tours and some pathways. The orchard is managed through our Orchard Steward program, which is essentially a volunteer leadership program, and we do monthly events at the orchard, engaging people in work and in learning. The Green Thumb Community Orchard was an existing orchard on a 12-acre site that's an urban agricultural education center. It has an interesting history. It was formerly a dairy farm, then a high school agricultural training site. When the agricultural training program lost its funding, it was turned over to local universities to manage, but the orchard was neglected. So the orchard is 1 acre of this 12-acre site. It's in a working-class neighborhood in southeast Portland, so even though it's a large site, it's in an urban neighborhood. And the orchard had been pretty neglected. We had been harvesting the trees for a few years when we finally were at the point where we were able to take over management, and are in partnership with Portland Parks and Recreation, who owns the land, and Portland Community Gardens, which is a city-run program that has a garden directly adjacent to the orchard. And the universities and the public school system also have programming on this site, so there are secondary partners here. The site initially had 60 fruit trees that were in pretty poor health, and we have, over the past few years, been working to increase the health and productivity of these trees. We had to remove some trees that were not ever going to be recovered, and we're able to plant some trees to replace them. So now the orchard contains 80 healthy fruit trees. It's managed through our tree care teams program, and we do additional community work parties and events, including an annual tour and cider pressing events. And the harvesting is done through our harvest program in dedicated events. So after our first few years of managing our community orchards program with these 2 pilot projects, we felt that the program really was successful and really was able to meet these goals that we had initially set out. And so we embarked on a program expansion and sort of laying the groundwork for future program expansion. As I mentioned, our mission is really focused on equitable access to healthful food and on reaching low-income communities. So when we put out a request for proposals from potential community partners, we were really focused on finding partnerships and sites that were deeply rooted in low-income communities. We were thrilled to partner with Village Gardens, which is an organization that does urban agriculture and nutrition programming with residents of affordable housing complexes in North Portland. The Fruits of Diversity Community Orchard is located on land owned by a railroad company, but leased on 100-year long-term lease to Home Forward, which is the housing authority of Portland. The site is adjacent to 2 affordable housing complexes and is about half an acre. After a process of community-led planning and design, we established the orchard and planted 20 new trees to accompany 20 trees that had been planted by Village Gardens a couple years prior but had not been maintained. The orchard now contains 42 fruit trees and numerous understory plants. And we have a phase 2 planned in which we're going to install some interpretive signage, some more trees, as well as some more understory plants. And this is the first community orchard in the country on public housing property, as far as we understand, which has been really thrilling for us and has been something that Home Forward has been able to sort of put as a feather in their cap, and they are totally behind this project, which is very exciting. The management is done through our Orchard Steward program, and we have a leadership coordinator team, and we do monthly work parties, which the dedicated leadership volunteers are a part of, as well as the broader community. And then we have our affiliate orchards program. So we have essentially what we have been wanting to do is to support other organizations and groups who have community orchards or want to start community orchards that we don't have the capacity to actually fully take under our wing. Essentially, we have very limited staff capacity and have recognized that we want to do everything that we can to make our orchard project successful, and then that takes quite a bit of effort, and so we're only able to manage a few orchards at a time. Our model is designed so that essentially in the first few years we're very hands-on with an orchard, and the plan is that over time we'll sort of hand off more and more of the management responsibility to the volunteers and the partners so that we can open up our time to establish new orchards. But in the meantime, we want to be supporting other organizations who come to us with requests for support. So what this support looks like is different depending on the project and the partner and the community. We currently have 3 orchard affiliates, and I'm going to share with you one as a sort of a good example. The Gabriel Orchard is in Southwest Portland on land also owned by Portland Parks and Recreation and adjacent to a community garden, similar to the Green Thumb Community Orchard. A big difference is that this is in a more affluent neighborhood, so it's not a priority area for Portland Fruit Tree Project. Of course, everyone needs access to fresh fruit, and the benefits that a community orchard can provide are valuable for everyone. But really, because we have limited capacity, we've decided that we're going to focus our energy primarily on serving low-income communities. But this is a fabulous orchard with 47 fruit trees that were planted in 1991 and that the city has really struggled to maintain. We've been harvesting them for many years, but recognize that they really need adequate care in order to continue to be productive, and also to serve more as a community asset and to get more people involved in the orchard and to benefit from its educational values. So we have essentially created a partnership with the city to help recruit volunteers, promote work parties, provide support in a way that's a lot more autonomous, so that volunteers are essentially bringing their own tools, coordinating the events, and we're providing that support. So I wanted to next share with you some exciting news for our next community orchard project. We're looking to start a new orchard in one of the lowest income neighborhoods of Portland, in outer East Portland, where you can see on these maps sort of over here east of this dividing line, which is 82nd Avenue. There are much lower median incomes and much less proximity to fresh food outlets. So this is an area that's been identified as a priority area for food access in our city. We're excited to be partnering with Park Rose Church, which is located right about here, to develop an orchard on their site. We have our community design process planned for the spring of this year. We're going to be installing about 60 trees and a number of other elements over the next year and a half. And there are a number of partners already existing working with this church, including an emergency food provider, a community garden program that focuses on engaging refugee communities, and a homeless warming shelter. Those are the secondary partners I listed there. And we're excited to apply lessons learned from our other orchards to make this one really successful. Some challenges and lessons learned that we'd like to share with you. So assuming that many folks on this call are creating their own community orchards or are striving to do so, we thought it would be helpful to share some of the things that we've learned. One is irrigation. We have struggled with irrigation. It looks different at each site, but one thing that we are going to always do from now on is to install a drip irrigation system from the start, rather than having volunteers haul buckets, which this volunteer is doing here. We've had some challenges with harvesting, basically getting notification when the fruit is ripe. So we've gotten dedicated volunteers as fruit monitors, who are folks who live in the neighborhood and go through the orchard regularly and can notify the group when harvests are coming on, so that we can swiftly organize harvesting events. And then we've had some challenges as the trees have matured in making sure that the fruit is left on the tree for the community harvesting events. So we've developed some really clear signage inviting people to taste the fruit, but to leave the majority of the fruit on the trees for community harvesting events, and inviting them to sign up for them. We have been challenged by differing models of volunteer coordination and orchard care for each orchard. This is not something that we would do differently, because each site is different and each community is different, but this just presents a challenge as we grow our program, that we're sort of reinventing the model for organizing with each orchard site. Another challenge is engaging our target audience in leadership roles. So we have a lot of volunteers engaged in leadership roles. Our target audience, being low-income families with young children, tend to be folks who have really limited time and might not be able to take on a commitment of every Saturday for the entire year. So we've been really trying to work with community members to figure out ways for them to take on leadership in a way that's comfortable for them. Another challenge we've faced is through our model, which is based on sort of us being really hands-on for the first few years and gradually decreasing our sort of coordination and leadership as our partners' coordination and leadership ramps up, has been a challenge as we get to that sort of switchover phase. And so really trying to get partners involved in leadership from the get-go as much as possible. And then finally, I mentioned our sort of limited staff capacity as we try. There's so much potential, and we love to do more, and we're just trying to grow the program in the ways that work for us in our budget. And finally, some measurements of success. So I'll go through this really quickly, but I thought this could just be helpful to show some of the things that we're able to measure and talk about and as we share our success. In 2014, we engaged 431 people in our program. 53% were from low-income households, and 2,000 hours of education and volunteerism. From the orchards themselves, we harvested about 3,500 pounds of fruit. As the orchards mature, we expect to be getting much larger yields every year. We are working with 185 trees, and these are some measures of volunteer leadership and community building that we take in surveys. 100% say these are of our lead volunteers, our orchard stewards, 100% felt they made a difference in their community, 70% said they increased their leadership skills, and 85% said they felt more socially connected. Another measurement of success is that many volunteers return year after year, and another is raising awareness. Community orchards have become something that folks are excited about in our community, and many more folks are wanting to see orchards start in their neighborhoods. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know I went over a little bit in time, but I also want to welcome into the conversation Gareth Stack, who's our Community Orchards Coordinator. He's an AmeriCorps member, and so he's going to join me in answering some questions.
All right, super. We have about 2 minutes to answer questions. We have more questions than we will be able to pose to you. We will post these questions on our Google form, and we will like to impose upon you, Katy and Gareth, to answer the questions that we don't get to here. So let me just bring up with the first two. One was a question of liability. How do you handle issues of insurance and liability for those who pick with you, especially on sort of public and private lands? And also ethnic tastes. Do you design plantings in light of the ethnic composition of the communities that you're working with?
Yeah, so as far as liability, we have everyone sign liability waivers when they come to participate. On the private property, we also have the tree owners sign liability waivers, and we also have memorandums of understanding or letters of agreement with each property owner, and we also carry general liability insurance for our organization. Gareth, do you want to answer the second question?
Yeah, sure. So as far as kind of representing the ethnic makeup of a neighborhood in a community orchard, our community orchards are designed with really heavy planning session in the beginning with very intentional design charrettes. For Fruits of Diversity, the most recent one, there were about 5 or 6 planning meetings before any single planting happened. And a large component of this is community members and self-identifying volunteers in the neighborhood having a lot of dialogue and discussion about what fruit trees they want at the orchard and kind of how the makeup and design is going to look. So the kind of process happens organically based on kind of the volunteers in a neighborhood who will come out and participate in these meetings.
All right, super. Well, thank you so much. Thank you again, Kyle. Thank you, Katy. This has been fabulous. Remember, everyone, this has been recorded. You can come back to this, pick up some of the information you might want to see again, and also share this with others. We're going to be putting up a slide in a minute that'll be showing you the future dates for our webcast. We will be meeting on the 4th Tuesday of each month. You can see there's TBDs in every one of those for the orchard stories, piece stories from the field. So if you would like to promote and highlight your organization, please let us know. But we will be meeting again on March 24th. I want to say a special thank you to Anthony Lee of AC Trees of the Alliance for Community Trees. He's been invaluable in establishing this organization. and he will be leaving AC Trees after tomorrow and moving on to Vanguard Communications, working with Communications for Social Change. So Anthony, you've been fabulous. Thank you all so much. Sarah, we're delighted to be working with you. Thank you all for joining us today. I do want to let you know that we're working here in Baltimore with Towson University. They're going to be doing a survey of organizations that do urban orchardry, and we would like to be able to send that information out to you over the coming months so that you'll be able to participate in their surveys and help us understand a little bit more about who we are. And it is now exactly 2 o'clock. We thank you all. Have a wonderful month. Hope to see you next month. Take care. Bye-bye.